Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on active learning. We're specifically looking at active learning this afternoon in the context of flipped classroom and how that is affected by doing active learning now in online spaces instead of in actual classrooms. So that's the premise for our conversation today. But we never know where the conversation may go. We have a fabulous lineup of panelists today. And so I'd like to ask our panelists if you could each please just take a moment to introduce yourself, and whoever is moved to go first, please do.
My name is Dr. Kendasi Brown. I usually go by Kendasi. I am an assistant professor of gerontology in the public health sciences department. And this past year, I got be a part of the active learning community in order to be able to learn how to use active learning engagement in my classroom. And I'm really excited about being able to actually take what I've learned this year into the active learning classroom.
Okay, thank you. Who wants to go next?
I'll go. My name is Mandy Carter. I'm an adjunct in the Department of Communication Studies. I've been at UNC Charlotte since the spring of 2016 and do everything that the CTL tells me to do, or I try to, and take all their courses and love to bug Jules and pick her brain all of the time. I have been a member of the Active Learning Academy for the past 2 years, and this year was in a small group with Darcy, so that was a lot of fun, and I look forward to the discussion today.
Okay, thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Kieran. I am an instructional CTL and I'm here to share any additional news or techniques or answer your.
Okay, thanks.
I'm going to go next, Jules.
Sounds good.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bobby Hobgood. I'm director of the Language Resource Center in the Department of Languages and Culture Studies. I also teach undergraduate French courses, and I teach online advanced foreign language methods, as well as pedagogy for TESOL. And I have the luxury of managing an active learning space, the Language Resource Center. Would love to have you come visit at some point in time. It is a space that was historically what we would call the language lab when I arrived at UNC Charlotte in the fall of 2014. And so collaborated with our faculty to gain funding and develop a design that would support second language teaching and second language acquisition. Excited to be here this afternoon.
Okay, thank you, Bobby. And last but not least, Cynthia. Cynthia, can you hear us? We are having very low recording on you on your sound. I can just barely hear you speaking. Maybe Cynthia, let's try this. Let's have you leave the meeting and then rejoin and see if that corrects the sound issue. And when I see you come back and rejoin, I'll find an opportunity for you to jump in and introduce yourself. Does that sound good? Yeah, that's probably the best thing to do. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. This is the prompt I have for our panelists to start out with today. So if you were using flipped classroom methods, or if you could imagine using flipped classroom methods, when we went to emergency remote instruction, you realize that all of a sudden the classroom portion where the engagement and the active learning was occurring is now being moved online. What do you do?
I would say, I would say the biggest challenge for my students was them having an understanding that they could still, for themselves, be able to teach or present in a way that other students could still understand them. And and it's different in the classroom where you automatically see where people are going to have a response to what you're saying, as to whether or not they're understanding it. It's encouraging them to encourage others to turn their on was really big. Of course, students really don't want to do that because half of them are waking, rolling out of bed and they're not dressed, so they don't want you to see them. And some of the professors are doing that too. So, so you have that aspect of it, but I think the technology piece was also, just learning how to use WebEx and learning how to show your presentations and learning how to talk into the camera and not being too close, so far away. It's like all these you don't have to think about when you're in this room because you're talking in front of so many people. So I think there were a lot of challenges to try to overcome.
Almost like online etiquette. We teach students about online etiquette, but maybe now we need to be thinking about teaching students about webinar and web classroom etiquette as well. It's amazing what it can do for you, for example, but yeah, I think it's points. Thank you. Who else would like to
The
add?
biggest, oh, I'll talk. I think the biggest challenge for me was trying to preserve the interactive nature of a flipped classroom. So I think we likely have all different versions of what flipped classrooms mean, but for me, it's kind of where you're moving a lot of the traditional lecture content off to let the students do that before they come into the classroom, whether they watch a video before class or a pre-recorded lecture or an article. And one of the classes that I teach is a debate class, and it's the whole last part of the semester is student debates and their partner debates. And it literally started the day that we had to move online, and it's highly, highly interactive. And so that was really a big stress of mine, but one that actually played out really well. The students did a nice job with it, but trying to figure out how to maintain the interaction between the students. So not just from me to the students, but with them, because they create their own kind of work product to deliver to the others. And so trying to, again, encourage their use of video, their use of audio. We had to use Zoom for a lot of it because I put them in breakout rooms and I wanted them to be able to see each other, which I don't think WebEx allows that. And so just trying to pick the right technology to meet the needs of the class. I think we achieved that. I did see some dips in student conversations. Those who were on mute or had the black screens didn't participate as much, but just the interactivity of it all, because that's, you with flipped learning and what we've been trying to build through flipped classrooms, it's so interactive between the students. And so that was a big concern of mine and a struggle for mine. The students did adapt. It wasn't the same as face-to-face. So I think the biggest challenge was just student-to-student interaction for me.
I see we've got a comment from Celia saying that keeping groups small could be helpful. I think that's a great idea. What happens though if you have a really large class? Celia says she lost small groups. Okay, got it. Natasha would like a definition of small. Celia, how many students in a small group in your class? 8? Okay, excellent. Mandy, do you have any additional, how did you get your students to adapt and interact? Can you talk a little bit about how when we moved to emergency remote teaching that what did you say to the students? What did you tell them? How did you direct them to get them to try to adapt and to try to interact? I know you said it wasn't as good as it was when they were face to face, but how did you kind of prompt them?
Well, at least I teach 2 different classes, and in the debate class at least, we had been building towards these debates all semester. So it was something that we've been excited about since day one. And so there was still that excitement there. We actually had a practice session before it counted, where everyone got to participate and play around the technology. And I tried to make the debate topics not as intense or as like meaty as they would have been in the classroom. They were more fun and lighthearted, which I think drove a lot of participation. And some students didn't participate as I think they would have in the classroom. But a lot of them really seemed to crave the interaction with each other. They kind of enjoyed speaking and seeing each other and really welcomed that. So I don't know if I did a lot to adapt or to cause the students to adapt. I think that I need to give them a whole lot of credit because it was really a kind of a seamless transition for that class where I spent a lot of time worrying about it. I did send a lot of detailed instructions about this is what we're going to do. I did screen shots where I would video kind of instructions for how to get into the technology, and also, you know, try to present that in different ways, also in written form as well. So I think I gave a lot of specific instructions to them about what to expect with the technology, how to use the technology, understanding that they probably had used it before, but we were, you know, doing it in a slightly different way. I tried to insert jokes into random parts of, you know, if I was doing more of a traditional lecture in my other classes. I, you know, did random polls. I guess we'll talk about that probably more organically as the conversation goes along today. But as far as adapting, I gave a lot of specific instructions up front. I try to think about what would I want to know as a student transitioning. I didn't have a lot of answers to every single question, but I really do have to give my students a lot of credit. And again, not all of them, but the vast majority did want to come along, and they seemed to just enjoy the chance to see other people and interact with them.
Okay, thank you. Any of our other panelists want to chime in?
Hi, Jules, it's Bobby. Hello?
You're on, Bobby.
Okay, great. I just
Yes.
waiting for a confirmation there. Sorry. So I want to extend what Mandy said. For me as well, in my French class, we already have a flipped model in that the curriculum for this particular course, the publisher provides online video tutorials, activities. The textbook itself is completely online. It's an interactive textbook. So the course was already set up such that before class, students would get the grammar, vocabulary tutorials online via the curriculum, via the text. Then the face-to-face class was devoted to authentic use of French. So practicing the language, which means obviously a great deal of interaction, both teacher to student and student to student, as well as student to content. So that three-pronged framework that we often use to talk about interaction and community in a course, that was already there. And so when we went remotely, students as well as myself, you know, we all noticed that the ability to engage in that spontaneous interpersonal communication had gone, you know. I mean, of course, we could go into small groups, and I did a lot of that. We could meet as a large group, but there's still, because you have to kind of wait until someone finishes talking, you can't anticipate, you can't talk over someone. So it's not the true authentic type of interaction. Although, given where we are in the world today, perhaps this is authentic in terms of interpersonal communication. So Mandy, like you, I kind of struggled with, how do I still try to promote that student-to-student interaction? A couple of things that I did. The first was, as I mentioned earlier, the use of breakout rooms. And one of the things in WebEx that was problematic was if I shared a graphic or some sort of prompt in the main WebEx room, as you know, when they go to the breakout rooms, they're no longer in the room. So I had to figure out how to do that. And I did a couple of things. One was create a shareable Google document and send them before class the link to that document so they could all see it when they went out in breakout rooms, and or send a link via the chat box before they went to the breakout rooms. And then the other thing, when we were working together as a large group, we could do formative assessments typically by, like fingers 1 to 5, show me on a scale from 1 to 5 how well you understand this. Show me a thumbs up if the answer is true, thumbs down if it's false, that sort of thing. And so you can do that certainly using the emoticons in WebEx. But then it became a bit problematic when I needed a response that was more than, a simple check this or check that. In other words, I needed a word or a sentence. And so I would accommodate that by asking students to, in the chat box, send me a message privately. So that way, at a glance, I could formatively assess, oh, okay, looks like about 75% of the class is getting this and the other 25 not. So maybe I need to keep working on this a little bit more. I'm still, my brain is still, churning and trying to figure out what I'll do this summer. It'll be the first time I've taught summer school. And I did get permission in the course catalog, was able to get it in under the wire that students are going to meet synchronously. So they should expect that. Of course, we're not going to meet 2 hours a day for 4 days a week. That's ludicrous. So I've kind of come up with a plan for that, but I'm still kind of working around that interactivity piece. I think it can be done. It's just going to require, I think, more experience on the part of everyone. And like somebody said earlier, really preparing students and thinking from the student's perspective, what is it like to sit in a session like this as a student? What am I experiencing? So that's kind of been my design perspective as I'm going towards summer. Thanks, Jules.
Thank you. I know we've got Cynthia back with us again. Cynthia, let's see if we can hear you now.
Okay, how's that?
Yes, we can hear you. So let me get you to introduce yourself. And then if you want to have any comments on the prompt that we have up right now, we'll start with that.
Okay, that sounds great. And I will say, first of all, I was sitting outside enjoying this absolutely beautiful day, and then the lawnmower guy came. So it's been kind of one of those days. But in any case, so I am with the Belk College of Business. I teach finance classes. Prior to joining UNCC a few years ago, I was a professional portfolio manager, and I also happen to teach our new recruits, as I like to call them. And we had offices around the world, so we were using a lot of the technology that we're using now to facilitate that. Classes I was in college. So I can answer I teach are large. So we're talking about over you're doing things online and you've got smaller groups. When you've got over 100, you've got to adapt in different ways. From a flipped classroom, the students needed some time to understand the rules of engagement. And I typically, to what some of the earlier commentators were mentioning, the importance of providing a lot of the information up front about how the class is going to be structured, how things are going to go. And I think students would hear it, they would see it, but they wouldn't understand that we're going to do it immediately. And so typically by the second class, when they should have done the lesson part of the assignment online and come to class prepared to engage with each other and me on some of the material, they were typically surprised when the very first thing I would do would be give an assessment. And I would base the assessment on being able to use the tools to see when they were online, what did they tend to do well in and what were some areas that they struggled. And the assessment I did tended to be on things that they were doing better on, so get them their confidence up, but also as a way to encourage them to do it. Because many times students would, I would say, flip classroom and they would still, they could just come to class and they would, kind of get the material the way they normally did. But after they got used to, okay, when I come to class, I'm going to be quizzed on the material I should have done over the kind of the rules of engagement, so to speak. The other thing I'll say is that it is challenging not being able to engage from a face-to-face perspective when you're moving online, and that's particularly true when you have a class of over 100 students. So it's hard for me when they're online for people to be able to use the raise their hand, for example, because it would take me forever to be able to scroll down everybody's name to see who's raised their hand online. The other thing is with the breakout rooms, you can have the software automatically assign people to breakout rooms, but when you have students coming in, some will come in late and then they've missed the assignment, you've got to try to add them in, and et cetera, it can get a little bit clunky administratively. So what I found was that actually doing offline breakout rooms and then having people, so they literally log out of WebEx, they log into separate software to do breakout rooms, and then come back in and we regroup at a certain time, has tended to work better versus using the breakout room functionality in either WebEx or Zoom. I will also say I see in the chat there are some questions about Poll Anywhere. That is a software that I do enjoy using. There are a bunch of different poll softwares you can use. What I did find is trying to use some of that software within WebEx, if you're doing a share my screen, tended to not work as well. But again, if I had students kind of exit and go directly to the software, that tended to work better. So I guess those are some initial thoughts, and I'm happy to continue the discussion.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing the question right now that we have up on the screen just because I want to just go to video. So we're going to just go to videos now so we all see each other. So we'll see our speaker. We have a really interesting question in the chat that I want to address that I think that probably everyone has had an issue with recently, which was, let me go back and find it. It was, how often do you get overwhelmed by multitasking while teaching in WebEx and Zoom? And what do you do to manage that?
Jules, can I answer that one? Yeah, so I was having this conversation with my sister recently and trying to describe what the experience is like for us since we've gone into, to quote your very accurate description, emergency remote teaching, because it is emergency remote. It's not online learning. And I described it as I feel like I'm producing myself on a TV show, a live TV show, because there are all of these pieces that I'm trying to moderate, negotiate. And so one of the things that I've done along those lines is, to kind of, and there's a name for this, maybe Jules, you know it, or any of you who have experience in broadcast journalism, where you list out kind of by timestamps, what's going to happen, who's responsible, what materials or resources need to be queued up and ready to go. And so, I mean, it's taking all of these things to a different level. Even when you do that, they're going to be snafus. And so one thing that I found important and useful, rather than having just dead air silence, is to just kind of narrate aloud, okay, everybody, hold on just 1 minute, and I'm going to do this, and then we're going to move on to the next step. So at least students are hearing you and they're aware that something's going on and that all of a sudden you haven't disappeared. So that's tended to work well for me in terms of, how do you handle those snafus? The other thing was just being very frank with students. When we went remote, having done a lot with technology in the years, I've always found it's good to be very upfront and honest with students and just to say, hey, look, realize this isn't going to be seamless, but I'm doing my best to try to mitigate any of the technology issues. And so here's what I need from you on your end to do that. So in thinking about my summer school class, I just sent out, and I'm going to have to send it again, obviously, but sent out an email to students preparing them for the experience and talking about the ways in which we'll use technology, and also at the same time encouraging them to think about, as somebody said earlier, make sure that little brother isn't going to run naked in the background while you're on webcam, during class.
can share some techniques I've used to add on to Bobby's. I like, Bobby, what you said about putting on a show. I think that's exactly what we should practice for. What I've tried before, um, when the students are still coming in to your synchronous class or to your WebEx class or Zoom if you're using Zoom, it's good to have a slide up already that that prompts the students what's your agenda for that session so that they're not wasting time just kind of hanging around. It's good to have an agenda slide up. There are two purposes for that. One is to them and they know that they're in the right room, right? And then the second one is it starts their mind setting to prime them that this is what they expect for that 30 minutes or whatever time or 1 hour. And having the agenda broken into chunks, like for the first 10 minutes, we're going to do this. For the next 10 minutes, we're going to break out. Another 10 minutes, come back together. It's almost like it saves your time to introduce all those instructions. But many students are not always auditory learners. They would like to see what you're saying. So having a chance to show that hand in the beginning allows them to already have that mental picture, but then you may also walk through that as you open your class session. A second tip that I could share is every time I do a presentation, especially when it's a class or a webinar or an event, I always practice. Like I never wing it because I don't know what can happen if it's live. So I use my family as my practice bed. So I have my family is in the Philippines, so I Zoom with them. I share my screen. I have audience that range from adults, which is my sister-in-law, my brother, and my sister, to the kids who are 8 and 6 years old, and I see how I could get attention. And I practice with them, and it makes me comfortable to look at the camera. It makes me comfortable to know where my hand should be. It makes me comfortable to watch my eyes. Once you get automatic with that, then it's easier for you to focus on the content and the delivery than focus on how you look and where you're looking. And sometimes we can't help but look in other places, and that's not wrong. It's just a comfort level that you want to reach so that you're not afraid of the video camera. So I practice with my friends and family so that I can look stupid if I want to. And then if I want to be in a class space or in a professional space, then I already know pacing and I already know how fast I should speak or how slow I should speak. So those are two techniques that helps me multitask and then also preparation. Just knowing what you're gonna do for that 30 minutes is so important.
Yeah, I'll also add in. I was going to say, I'll also add that I think it's important not to get ahead of your skis, right? So do the things that you feel comfortable doing at the pace that you feel comfortable doing them. And certainly, some of the technology tools have some really cool bells and whistles. But if you haven't had an opportunity to practice with them and figure out are they really going to be added to your course, take your time before you incorporate them. So I'm really getting at the faculty multitasking question. I found that I tried to do something different to maintain the students' engagement kind of every 10 to 15 minutes. But I always tried to make sure I didn't do too many things, right? You don't want screens flying in and out and this happening and that happening, and all of a sudden it's just too much. So there is a happy medium. And I like the suggestion of just trying to practice a little ahead of time and figuring out what you're comfortable with.
Add into what everybody else has said as far as the multitasking is concerned. I think one of the most difficult parts is being the person who's speaking and then also having to look at the chat. And I noticed that, you have those students who are going to ask questions, they'll speak up, and then you've got others who would just rather, write everything out. And so what I learned to do is I would say, I'm going to stop here and I'm going to look at the chat to see if there are any questions that I might have missed and read the questions and then go ahead and, answer the questions. And before we even actually started doing everything, I told the students to make sure that they understand that everything they write down in the chat room is going to be read by if you want to say something to your friend, it's best that you probably go ahead and text them, or you want to send them an email, because you don't want to have anything that's inappropriate or would deem inappropriate by me within the chat room. So when I heard about other people reading what their students were saying and stuff like that, I was like, well, I never had that issue because I let them know from the jump. Don't write anything in this room that you don't want me to either say something about or read about, or or joke with you about, so, but that was definitely the, a multitasking part with being able to, talk to the students and to be able to, see, answer it. And I had some students who would do it privately. So that would also let me know, okay, they don't want everybody else to know that this is, a personal question for them. And I would take the moment and say, I have to answer a question privately, and answer the question. The other thing that I found after, I think maybe the second or third time that we had our teaching, was I sent out a poll, not poll everywhere within the classroom, but I sent it on the announcements that we have with Canvas, just asking the students what they thought about how classrooms were going, what they thought I could improve on, what they preferred. And it was really, really helpful, because I realized that students, in order to stay engaged, they didn't want me to give them all of the answers. And through some of my other presentations, and take out information, so that they could then pull up the PowerPoints on their own, and they could type information in, and that helped them to stay engaged. So just like we're encouraged to do like a midterm, mid-semester, did the same thing after, I think it was after our third or fourth class, because I really wanted to know, is what I'm doing actually for you, or is it something else I can do that will help us out? And I got a lot of really good feedback from the students.
Yeah, I did the same thing about 2 weeks in. Once we kind of had a few classes underneath our belt and had a feel for how things were going to go, did the same thing. I used like a survey monkey, so it could be anonymous, and got some really great feedback, some things I couldn't change and some things that I could change. And it's all about, I think, managing expectations. I liked what Bobby said about there is a rehearsal component to it, and then there's also a narration part. With the online learning, you're missing a lot of body cues from the students, and you're missing, you can't see all of their faces, or to be able to tell when there's confusion and when there's boredom. And so narrating things aloud, letting them know what's coming up. I like the example also about posting the agenda. It's about expectations, and managing expectations. Coming into the semester, the students expected to have a full semester of in-person classes. None of us expected to be in this environment. And, I just kept sending messages about grace the whole way through, grace for me, grace for you. And I think that helped things as well with the students, but definitely helping them feel like they have an active say in what's going on in the classroom when they're losing controls in a lot of other areas, I think was beneficial for all of us.
I'll also say that I had an epiphany that some of my quieter students actually prefer this type of setting, particularly when I'm using the whiteboard, because they are able to, I encourage them to answer questions on the whiteboard. I'll pose a question and I suggest they answer it on the whiteboard, or I'll ask them a question and ask them to put their thoughts in the whiteboard. And they can do so anonymously. And so students who are quieter in my in-person classes are much more vocal when I open a whiteboard. And I think they really enjoy that. And so I have appreciated that, being able to hear from students where normally I need to do a little bit more work in a face-to-face setting, in an online setting, they are much more vocal. So that's kind of a different perspective on that. And I see there was a question in the chat. I have been teaching a 3-hour once a week course. I have been doing it synchronously. Obviously you don't want to talk for 3 hours and the students don't want to hear you for 3 hours. So that is a course where I have tried to be very thoughtful in breaking that up into small, manageable chunks.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking at the chat and I'm seeing that we have a question, and I'm going to throw this out to the panelists, but also if anyone who is in the participants today has experience with this specific and wants to jump in and speak, we would welcome you to. Does anyone have any suggestions for online active learning for laboratory sections? Very specific for labs.
I can open the discussion with some ideas, but I think there will be many in the audience who might be able to add to this. One of the nature of a lab class versus a conceptual or topic centered class is that a lab class is highly process oriented, right? Rather than topic oriented. So when we talk about processes, you know, the process matters more than the product or the outcome. And you want students to go through a process repetitively in multiple occasions over the course so that they build skill, right? And they build competency in the process. So what I've noticed as an instructional designer for many years is that many times students are not able to regulate their own processes and they tend to follow instructions as they come. So when you go online and there's nobody to tell you the instructions right offhand, because that happens a lot in a class, it's very important to make the process that students are expected to perform explicit. Now, what does this mean? It means reviewing with students again. Remember, this is what we're expected to do as skills. And whatever activity you have in mind and whatever subject area that comes to need a lab is circumstantial, but there's a process that guides lab work. Now, it could be there's a problem, there's some data that needs to happen, some testing or evaluation needs to happen, and some reporting needs to happen. These are lab skills. So it's important to tell students or articulate to students that these are the skills that we need to do, articulate that very explicitly, and give them a process to follow. And then any lab experiment or lab activity should fall into that process. That allows you to build students' self-regulation skills. Now they regulate their work so they can do it on their own. And that's the difference between being in a classroom lab versus online lab, where classroom lab, they tend to do it with others and follow step-by-step instructions gradually. When they have to do it on their own, the tendency is they get lost. Like, how do I start? And what do I do next? How do I prepare for these activities? So that might be one technique. Explicitly articulate what's the process, emphasize the steps to the process, and make sure that the same process is being repeated across different activities over the course of the period of activity or over the course of the semester, whether it be 3 weeks now or maybe an entire semester. I'll end with that, and then maybe others can jump in on the self-regulation process when it comes to these skills-based courses.
Kieran, I'll follow you with a couple of thoughts here. First of all, the idea that students are following a process, it's challenging for so many of them, as you noted, when we're in a face-to-face setting. There's always the opportunity for them to negotiate meaning by asking questions of a particular step in the process. I will tell you, in a former life, as a curriculum specialist, observing classroom teachers, one of the pitfalls that I often observed was when a teacher would give a series of steps or directions to students for group or collaborative work verbally. And as soon as students get in their groups, there was this flurry of hands and questions. Okay, what do we do? And it's, as I think you observed or someone else observed earlier, you've given a series of verbal steps and there's no reference, there's no visual reference to anchor what you said. So one suggestion again is realize that in a face-to-face classroom, it's important to accompany verbal steps with the written, so on a slide behind you. Having said that, when we think about now the increased level of self-direction that is required in the online course, I think we're all starting to see this phenomena, i.e. that in face-to-face, we can scaffold, we can react when there's a breakdown in communication in terms of a process. So online, you have to anticipate where are those moments that this communication is likely to falter, and what scaffolds can I provide to support that in the absence of me being there with them. But I think we should all be kind to ourselves and recognize because, and maybe we're to blame for this, all of us collectively, because we've always been there to repeat, then they haven't paid attention maybe the first time. So maybe some of our students have been acculturated to knowing that, oh, if I didn't get it, it's okay. I can just raise my hand or I can just ask out loud in the classroom. So be kind to yourselves and realize that in an online course, initially, no matter how beautiful your bulleted or numbered list is, no matter how skillfully you use formatting tools along with infographics, some students are going to miss it because they're very poor at process reading as well as following processes. So that kinesthetic reaction to what they're reading. So maybe create some low stakes practice sorts of steps initially that they can go through, to become acculturated to the idea of, okay, here's step one, I've done step one, now I'm going to do step two and step three. And maybe that's something that you could do as an orientation in a course. So if you have an orientation to a summer school course, you build that in, and you make it very explicit that here's how I'm going to communicate processes to you. And if you don't understand a process, here are the ways in which you can get clarity on that particular process. So that's just one thought that I have as you were talking about this in terms of those online processes and labs. I can tell you in version 2.0 of my life, working with our state's virtual public schools, where they were teaching courses that had associated labs. So, the students would get mailed to their homes laboratory kits, and there was a combination of directions in hard copy with the kits as well as online directions, but they also provided in the form of teaching assistants who, at a designated point, the students could log in, similar to what we might call office hours, and ask questions about, okay, I want to make sure I'm understanding these directions properly. So building in some additional support for those sorts of online, what traditionally we were there to support the processes face-to-face, what are the supports you can build in online, ranging from carefully crafted instructions to preparing them for it, to building in opportunities, fixed opportunities to get support.
Okay, thank you, Bobby. I'm going to move on. We've got some other questions, and this conversation is going so wonderful. We only have 15 minutes left in our webinar. That's happened fast. So we'll take a look. A question we have here is, what have you found as effective ways or strategies to encourage verbal discussion from students when you ask questions in an attempt to promote critical thinking? So what are some ways that you can get students to respond to questions with critical thinking in the online environment?
Yeah, I just ask them directly and call out their teacher that classroom, and that's the kind of teacher I am online. And they all know that it's going to happen, so everybody's got to think it. Sometimes I'll, ask the question. I'll give you a minute to think of this. Really, I give them like 30 seconds, but I give them that time to think about it. And if somebody doesn't start talking, then I'm calling names. Usually that everybody to say something because they don't want to get called out. So that's not the only way. There have been times where I've also given them the paper, and these are the questions we're going to be going over And so you need to make sure that you have read the information, that you can speak to these different things. Even if they've done that and they have the answers in front of them, some of them still won't say anything. And so that's when I just go and I just name.
I would say for those of you who may be teaching large sections, it is a challenge because it's hard to unmute everyone. You've got 100 students, you unmute everyone, you just get babble, right? So what I have found is those, if I want them to actually have discussion with each other, to move those offline has tended to work better. As a way to hopefully get them engaged with each other. I'll tell them, okay, I'm going to need a spokesperson from each group. You'll have 10 minutes. Here is the question. Here are the separate rooms that I've set up that you should go to, et cetera, et cetera. So that I think has worked well if you have a larger class. I had mentioned the whiteboard and stuff. The students do enjoy typing thoughts in, but if it's more something that is more qualitative and it's going to require, I'll say a lot of words to kind of get the thought across, then the whiteboard tends to not be as effective. And the same issue with the chat room. So trying to make opportunities for them to speak verbally among each other in smaller groups is helpful. And, smaller groups with classes the size that I'm talking about, you may be talking, 7 people or so. So they're still fairly large, but the students really do enjoy the opportunity to chat with one another. I think that's one of the things they miss about the face-to-face. So trying to create those environments is helpful. I've also sometimes had them do videos of themselves with their phones, because of course they may not have a laptop, but almost everybody has a phone at this point. And so I've sometimes had them say, okay, answer this question, just video yourself with the phone, send in the video, and I'll play it on the screen for your classmates to see. And so that's another way to try to get some engagement going.
Cynthia, there's a specific question here for you about what kind of software you're using to have them do breakout sessions or to even share videos. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I've actually got a list. So maybe what I'll do, Jules, is I'll just send you the list of the different softwares, and you're welcome to send it out to others.
That sounds wonderful. I would love to share that with everyone on the call today. Thank you.
Mhm.
I know we have several pieces of software that work with Canvas, and they're awesome. They're not officially supported by ITS, but they do work within Canvas. There's a Flipgrid, there's VoiceThread. There are several things that are out there that you can make use of in this situation, I think, for certain. Okay, anyone else want to address that question?
I can add something on that discussion question. It's on my mind, so I thought verbal discussion is very tricky because the funny thing is we don't really have verbal discussion in the classroom as a whole group. The discussions concept of online discussions is really very foreign because we don't necessarily do that in a classroom. We do have some kind of discussion, but it's very, very short and very, very fast. When we do online discussions, there's a lot of space, at least the asynchronous version, there's a lot of space for thinking. Now, when it comes to like synchronous online discussion through WebEx, I would like everyone to kind of think about the purpose of the discussion matters more, and the reason why we want everybody to speak. So, like top of mind, there might be many reasons why we have discussions verbally. One is to share a reflective point, that everybody has a reflection on something. Another one could be we want to review, so everybody should answer and sort of recall concepts. Another one could be we're trying to solve a problem, and it's an open-ended discussion. So knowing the type of discussion will allow you to decide, should this be broken into small groups, or am I allowing just a few to speak because I just want to hear a representation of answers, right? And one where you break into small groups, it's not really feasible to have 50 students speak at the same time. So what you might want to do is in small groups, there might be a person assigned to talk back or report back, and consolidate answer so that you have representation of the voices of everyone, but shared over just a few. That's for many reasons. Like technology bandwidth is going to be a problem. You will have a lot of noise on WebEx, and that's just unmanageable. So that's some ideas. Now think of the reason why the discussion is important. Are you doing a concept review? Are you doing a reflection, or are you doing a problem solving activity? And from there, determine whether you need small groups or just random in the class. And then if it's small groups, you might want to have somebody report back so that everyone's voice is being represented and heard. And then that could cause a second layer discussion after.
Okay, thank you, Kieran. We've got one more question that I think we have time from our chat here. We have someone who needs students to get feedback from their peers on presentations. Should they present live to the audience and then create a discussion in Canvas? What might some other options be? I'm going to open that up to the panelists.
Jules, this is Bobby. So one of the strategies I've used with my online course in the past is to have them create a presentation using Screencast-O-Matic, which is readily available screen capture software. So they traditionally in a face-to-face classroom would use slides and then talk to the class. So with screen capture software like Screencast-O-Matic, they can capture their slides as well as a video of themselves talking at the same time. And so I then collected all of those and made them available via a shared Google folder, and then attached that in the prompt of a discussion forum in Canvas and asked them to reference, okay, I'm talking about Kieran's presentation, or I'm talking about Cynthia's or Dossie's or Celia's presentation right now. So that's one way to do that. The other option is to keep it within Canvas, is to have them actually upload their presentation in the discussion forum itself. So that way, you know, that takes some work off of you if they upload it there, or if their presentation, maybe they don't need slides, maybe it's just them talking about something. So that's always a nice twist to a discussion forum, after all, is rather than students answering your prompt textually, they could answer the prompt via a video. And then the responses to that video prompt could be either textual or as well, or audio. You decide the parameters of that. My students have consistently told me for the past 6 years that they love that kind of discussion. They also admit, though, that they've had to re-record a couple of times some of their prompts because they get self-conscious about it. But it's made me believe that if they did more of it, then they wouldn't have to re-record so much, and they would become more comfortable with just being themselves and realizing that, when we speak normally in a face-to-face classroom, we have these guffaws and these snafus as we're talking, and it's okay, so it's all right if you do it on your video too.
Thank you, Bobby. And it looks like Celia has just mentioned what I wanted to also add to this conversation, is that I don't know how many people on the call have used Kaltura before, but everything that you can do with Kaltura, your students also have the ability to do with Kaltura. So students can create a presentation and they can launch that in Kaltura and hit the Kaltura capture record button and have their video up, and they can give a presentation over their PowerPoint. They can record that. It will go into their My Media, and then they can put that video into a group discussion. And so you could have a graded discussion if you wanted it to be worth a grade. This is great for end of semester presentations. You could have a graded discussion, and you could ask everyone to create a presentation using any tool. Like Bobby said, you could use Screencast-O-Matic, you could use Kaltura. There's many tools out there that you could use, but they, in the end, upload it into My Media, which will take MP4 video, and then they can embed that into the discussion forum. And then part of the grade can be, watch all of your classmates' presentations, leave comments on at least 2 or 3 or however many you want students to comment on, and that can be part of a holistic grade. And so I'll send out in the email after the session is over, I will send out information about how to use Kaltura that you can share with your students too, so that you can have them do video presentations if that's something you're interested in. Anybody else want to chime in?
I did live presentations. I allowed them in class. I teach public speaking and also the debate class as well. I think it's a valuable skill for them to learn how to take over controls and how to share their screen and how to mute. And so it was kind of like the live skill component wrapped up in it. So I definitely used live presentations and had the students respond kind of directly on the spot, and then also through a separate assignment submitted straight to me that I then sent out to everyone else too. So I did use live student presentations.
Okay, thank you, Mandy. We are at 2:43, and so I'm going to bring us to a close here. This has been a fabulous conversation. Thank you so much to Dasi, Cynthia, Bobby, Kieran, and Mandy for being panelists today with us. It looks like Tanya has shared one more lab resource with us, and Tanya, I'm just going to copy and paste that. Oh, let me see. Can I copy and paste it? Let me see if I can copy and paste that in. Tanya's got one more that she's going to share with us, another lab resource. Let me send that out to everyone. There we go. Here it comes. And I will compile all of this into an email and send it to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you all so much for coming out. I hope that you continue to stay well, you and your friends and your family and everyone. And we will have more conversations about active learning in online spaces forthcoming, I promise. Thank you so much. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.